Welcome back, everybody. This is Steve KM9G, and I've got a NanoVNA puzzler for you. My buddy Thump sent this in, and I had a lot of help. I keep tossing it. A good thing it's got a lanyard on it. And my buddy Smokin' Ape helped me figure out whether this is good or bad, but not why it's good or bad. So there's a couple of different things that could have happened. Something could have gotten damaged in shipping. I don't know. It could have gotten wet somehow. It could have had some static discharge. It could have had any number of things. Overall, it looks perfectly fine, but it's not. So stick with me as we go through the saga of figuring out what is going on with this thing and how you can figure out if yours is good or bad. And then look in the description down below for good sources to get reliable, trustworthy NanoVNAs. Okay, so real quick before we get started, let me show you what it's doing. I'm going to turn it off completely, and then I'm going to turn it back on again. And I'm going to zoom in, because that's not going to be very easy for you guys to see. Alright, right there looks pretty good. I bring up display, and I want to hit config, and then I want to do version. And we're at NanoVNA, and this is the TTRF Tech firmware, and it is version 080-2- what is that? GD02DB79. I guess that's the GitHub commit hash. But that's where that is. Now, if I try to do some manipulation, like right now, this screen is too busy. I have a 50 ohm dummy load plugged in, and I want to get rid of. I just want to see the Smith chart, and I want to see the SWR. So I tap the screen. That was 3 times to tap the screen, and it finally came up. I hit back and missed, I hit back and missed, I hit back and missed, I hit back and finally got it. And I do display, and then I do trace, and I want to turn off trace 2. I want to turn off trace 3. I want to select trace 0, which turned it off, but now we've turned it back on to select it. I'm going to go back and choose format. I'm going to make that the SWR. And it says 1.0, which is good. Let me go back in. I missed the back button, I missed the back button, I hit the back button, let's go back in, oh, missed trace, hit trace, trace 1, back, so we've selected trace 1, I missed the back button twice now, missed the format button, hit format, and we're going to change that to Smith chart. So now I've got the Smith chart in the background, and I've got the SWR meter across the bottom. Channel 0 is SWR, and channel 1 is Smith, and that's the colors of the traces, and I don't think that aligns with the channel connectors, the SMA connectors on the side. So that's twice I hit back, 3 times I hit back, 4 times I hit back. Alright, so maybe it's me. Alright, let's scroll down with the back, config. Let's go up to do touch calibration, upper left, lower right, touch test. So you can see that it's tracking real well down there into the corners. Alright, good. So now we save that, and we go back to display, format, back, format, back, format, back, back, seems to be working good. Config, save it, turn it off, turn it back on, and it did not save our channel markers. That's fine. Let me get this reconnected onto an actual antenna, and we'll start checking out what's going on there. Alright, so what I have here is my, wrong direction, is my DX commander, and I've got a SO239 to SMA adapter, and I've got a short SMA jumper. It's one of the jumpers that comes with it. And I guess before we even get that far, I know everybody's going to ask, so let's get this thing calibrated. So now we're all calibrated. Let's stick this thing back on, and this dummy load is 1.0010 on the SWR chart. Alright, and it's kind of all over the map and moving. Let's change this down to 40 meter band. And we've got a nice flat curve there. That looks pretty good. and it's telling me that my SWR is 1.1-ish right here at the bottom, and that's at 7.24, and it just moved a little bit. That could be wind. And we're at 50 ohms. We're at a pretty good 50 ohm match. Let's see. Yeah. All the way across. So there's definitely something going on there. Now I do have, for comparison's sake, this is my NanoVNA. There's nothing on the back of it. I do have another one. Let's turn this one off. Let's grab the second one that a friend of mine let me borrow, K9WEN. So we will take, this one's mine, move it out of the way. This one's Bill's. We'll use this one. And you can tell because his has the one yellow cap on it and mine doesn't, so keep your eyes on that. Let's turn this thing on. He's already got a different firmware, so let's pull that back up again. Config, version. This is NanoVNA H from the HUGEN 79, HUGEN 79 repository on GitHub, and this is version 0.4.5.1 with the GitHub, what the heck is that? Commit hash at the end of it. And this is December 26, 2019. Bill says he's never upgraded this. He just opened the box and started working with it. So first off, let's go back and do calibration, because everybody's going to ask. Let's calibrate. All right, let's change to a real antenna. Okay, that's already a little bit cleaner. Let's change the stimulus. Start 7 megahertz. Stop 7.4 megahertz. What I'm going to do, at the very least, is take the firmware that's on here, the HUGEN version, and I'm going to install it on mine. All right, we are back at the desk. Let's turn this off after our firmware update, turn it back on. And then I want to go in and I want to look at the version. So let's do config version. And now this is the TTRF Tech NanoVNA version. All right, I went back over and I checked out HUGEN's repo, and he does not mention his own name in the code. And this TTRF tagline, whoa, just lost it, version. This TTRF tagline right here is mentioned in the code. Let's zoom in a little bit more. And then what's interesting is that this version number is now blank, build time November 1st, 2021, which is the date that I'm recording this and the time that I'm recording this. And yeah, so the old version was 080-2 and the new version is blank. So the last one was October 24th that I built it, and this one was November 1st that I built it, and this is a different repo than that one was. The copyright notice on the old one is 2016 to 2020. The copyright notice on the new one is 2016 to 2019. We'll give it a shot anyway. This still doesn't match the version that Bill had on his, because his was blue when you did version, instead of this one here that's white, or it said NanoVNA. Alright, so let's do touch calibrate, touch upper left, touch lower right, and then let's do touch test, and that works, and we're into the corners. Yep, alright, everything's good there. Just to replicate the test that we had before, let's do a calibration on it. And we're kind of all over the chart there, but that's okay. It's different than it was before. Let's pick 40 meters, back, back. The back button seems to be happy now. Let's do config. Let's save the calibration. Let's do stimulus. Not the calibration, the settings, I hope. The touchscreen calibration. The start of stimulus is going to be 7 megahertz. The stop of stimulus is going to be 7.4 megahertz. Okay, so there we have that running. Let's zoom this out just a hair. And it just switched the center again, centered 7.6 and span 400. So let's do stimulus, start, 7 megahertz, stimulus. Yeah, I just did that twice because I hit the wrong one. 7.4 megahertz. All right, start 7, stop 7.4, and it just moved back to center mode. So we'll do start 7 megahertz, and we'll do stop 7.4 megahertz. Yeah, and the minute that I move the jog wheel, it changes to center mode. Okay, let's plug in the DX commander just for grins. We're already convinced that there's something going on here. And nothing. Awesome. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. Again, Bill's is the version that has the yellow caps on the SMA connectors, and mine does not have yellow caps. So we've applied this. This came with a version of firmware on it that gave me strange results. I applied an update to the firmware and I got strange results, and then I applied a third update to the firmware. So the firmware it came with, the firmware I applied, and then the third firmware. So technically I applied 2 updates if you want to be pedantic about it, but we're not about being pedantic on this channel. We're just about having fun. And I got strange results with all 3 versions of the firmware. This one seems to be working well, but I don't really, like, in order to verify that this one's working great, I should have a known good thing to compare it to. And so what I have right now is one unknown and one slightly known. And so next up, let's do some visual inspection type stuff. So right away, the differences between the two, the case looks exactly the same. I mean, there's even the little dimples where the receivers for the screws are in there. The silkscreen on Bill's version looks better than the silkscreen on my version. The touchscreen feels the same. The SMA connectors are in the same spot because it's the same case. The QR codes on the back both go to the same location. The text on them is the same. So the only thing left to do now is to open them up. Unscrewing montage to follow. And what I'm going to do just for safekeeping is I'm going to keep all of Bill's parts on the right and all of my parts on the left. So there won't be any parts swappage going on. Alright, let's check the QR codes. NanoVNA.com. NanoVNA.com. The 2 QR codes match. Both say NanoVNA H. Both look pretty close to the same. On this side, get out my danger glasses. That all looks the same to me. And these guys here are RF shields that simply lift off. So we will lift them off. I'm not seeing anything different on the inside. I'm going to put these back together. So a rescrewing montage will now follow. Alright, that's all back together. Let's grab the dummy load and the calibration standards. Okay, so I want to go in here and I want to do... And we've got a happy SWR on the dummy load all the way across, on the dummy load standard all the way across. Let's change the NorCal SMT dummy load. And you see a little bit of a rise up, so this dummy load here probably doesn't have the same frequency range. So let's change it over to back, stimulus, start 7 megahertz, stop 7.4 megahertz. Alright, we're at 7.4 to 7, and I'm using the jog wheel, and it's perfectly happy to do the jog wheel thing. Alright, so this one's back to its normal working condition just like we thought it would be. Okay, so let's sum it all up into one last little bit. How to tell if you have a good NanoVNA. You're obviously going to have to be able to compare it with another device, and that's where it gets to be difficult. Luckily, I've got friends, and I'm very grateful for that. And again, this is Bill's K9WEN, and this one is mine that came from Thump, and we think that this one is bad. So here's my test procedure. I'm going to take mine and move it out of the way. We're going to start off with the one that we think is good. Turn it on, and then we're going to set the stimulus for 40 meters. So we're going to set the start at 7 megahertz, and we're going to set the stop at 7.35 megahertz. So we're covering the 40 meter band, and then we're going to calibrate it very specifically for this part of the band. So we're going to hit calibrate. We're going to calibrate the open. Okay, the open is calibrated. Open means there's no connection, so there's no need to actually plug anything in. I'm going to calibrate this short, and I'm going to take my time and put it on good. I'm going to get myself out of the way, and then I'm going to hit short, and that's now calibrated. Then I'm going to take the load, and I'm going to calibrate this. And I'm really going to work hard to make sure that I get this thing calibrated so that it reads 1-to-1, or very close to 1-to-1. And now that's done. So we will save that as item number 0. And then this antenna here is a PL259 SO239 to SMA adapter, SMA lead, plugged into channel 0. And we're going to do a sweep on that, and we're going to record the lowest SWR. And the lowest SWR looks like 1.06. There's a bit of a range there where it's 1.06. Okay, 1.06 at 7276 megahertz. So I'm going to write that down. 1.06 at 7.276 megahertz. Okay, and then I'm also going to get a general impression that there is actually a curve there and something happening there. And that might be hard to see on the camera. Let's zoom it in a little bit for you. Yeah, you can see that there's a little bit of a curve there. And that's all you want to do. You want to get an impression of what that looks like. Next up, I'm going to switch it over to 20 meters and recalibrate. So I'm going to unplug the antenna. I'm going to calibrate. I'm going to calibrate the open. Done. Oops. I'm going to go back and I'm going to set the stimulus. I'm going to start at 14 megahertz, and I'm going to stop at 14.35 megahertz, so the 20 meter band. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to calibrate the open, calibrate the short. I'm going to make sure that I use the same test standards for all 4 tests that I'm doing. So get myself out of the way, calibrate the short. And the object here is just to be repeatable, not to be like quick. Calibrate the load. Done. Save 0. Alright, plug the antenna in. And now we've got kind of a line like this, and it is 1 point. It's moving a little bit as I am operating it. 1.26 at 14.0. So let me record that. And you can see that there's not an actual curve here, it's more of a line that goes up, and so what that means is that the other half of this curve is off on this side of the screen. So if I was to adjust my frequency measurement over to say 13.5 to 14.5, you would see that curve that we're looking for. But note that it's not a straight line. There actually is some difference in SWR as the antenna is moving. Okay, so we've got a good one there. And now we're going to take this and turn it off and get it out of the way, and we're going to try a different instrument. So again, this is Bill's, and this one is mine. We're going to do the same thing. Turn it on, and then I'm going to set the bandwidth, set the stimulus for a start of 7 megahertz and a stop of 7.35 megahertz. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to very specifically calibrate for that frequency range. Calibrate the open. And then I'm going to put the short on. And again, these are the same test standards, reference standards that I used for the other device. Short is calibrated. And then we're going to change that over to load. In some instances, I have heard people report that their loads do not calibrate to 1 to 1-ish. This is reading in 3 decimal places, so it's 1.004. make sure that when you do get a load calibration, it does read very close to 1-to-1 because it should be. And we're going to say done. We're going to save that to 0, and then we're going to test the antenna itself. And there we go. You can see that the trace across the bottom is flat. And if I move the jog wheel, the SWR doesn't change much. 1.001, 1.0, and we don't really have, you know, on the other device we had kind of a nice gradual sweeping low, you know, obtuse curve as opposed to an acute curve. And we don't have that. We have a very flat line across the bottom. So now I'm going to do this again. Let me write these numbers down, even though there's really not any numbers to write down there. 1.0 flat is my reference there. And now we're going to redo the calibration for the 20 meter band and test it again. So we will go back, we will do stimulus, we will do start 14 megahertz, we will do stop 14.35 megahertz, we will do back, we will do calibrate, calibrate the open, calibrate the short, calibrate the load, done, save 0, and then we will put the antenna to test back on. And again, we've got a flat curve across the bottom, and our lowest, it crawls up, but it crawls up by thousandths. Our lowest is 1.00. It's actually fluctuating between 0.01 and 0.02 at 14.0. So we don't have that slope like we had before. We have a flat line again. So there's the comparison between device A and device B. Device A, I would say, is probably okay, although I would technically probably need a third device to compare this to. But let's assume that we have a known good device, because I don't have any reason to not trust Bill on that. And then let's assume that this device is not working because it doesn't compare properly to the other device. And so, as you saw earlier in the video, there's like no reason to suspect physically, visually inspection, tearing it open, tearing it down, looking at it. There's no reason to suspect that there's something wrong with this. This could be counterfeit, or this could just be bad. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Either way, there is a video right over here that I think that you would like next. Thanks for being awesome.